She told me she settled for me, that she used to be grateful I could pay the bills, but now I was just a routine she couldn't stand. That was the moment I stopped waiting for her to change and started planning a way out. Not to run, but to take back everything she tried to erase. Jack Monroe was the kind of man who never asked for more than he could carry. 47 years old, foreman on a concrete crew in a small Ohio town, he'd spent most of his life in steel-toed boots and thick gloves. The work was hard, but it made sense. Pour the foundation right, and the building holds. Miss a step and everything above it cracks. He liked that. Simple rules, clear results. He met Elena on a rainy Saturday at the hardware store, standing in front of two nearly identical buckets of joint compound. She was muttering under her breath, frustrated. Jack offered to help. She looked him over once, smirked, and said, "You look like you actually know what you're doing." That was her way. Blunt, quick, unfiltered. They started seeing each other the next week. Elena moved fast. 2 months later, she moved into Jack's place. She brought energy, opinions, and noise. At first, it felt good, like someone had turned the lights on in a house he didn't realize was dim. She redecorated, filled the space with color, and pulled Jack into things he never thought he'd care about. Weekend drives, new recipes, live music at the town square. For a while, Jack believed they balanced each other. His steadiness grounded her restlessness. But balance has a way of slipping when one side keeps pushing. It started small. Elena began teasing him about his habits, how he watched the same 2 shows every night, how he fixed things instead of replacing them, how he never seemed to want more out of life than a quiet dinner and an early bedtime. Jack didn't mind the jokes. Not at first. He'd tell her she was dramatic, and they'd end the night with laughter muffled into his shoulder. But over time, the teasing stopped being playful. It sharpened. "You live like the world ended and nobody told you," she said once, barely looking up from her phone. "Like every day's just a copy of the one before." Jack had no answer for that. He liked his life. He'd built it with his own hands. But Elena made him feel like he'd been wrong to be content. The warmth between them cooled. Their evenings grew quiet in the wrong way. Jack would come home from a long day, hands cracked from concrete work, and find her on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging him. Other times, she wouldn't be home at all. No call, no note, just a car missing from the driveway and perfume lingering in the air. Still, he stayed. Jack wasn't blind. He knew she was pulling away. But he also remembered the good parts. The way she used to dance barefoot in the kitchen. How she once told him his hands made her feel safe. He thought maybe, if he was just patient enough, she'd come back to him. That the storm would pass and the quiet would be theirs again. But storms don't pass when one person keeps bringing the clouds inside. The first time Jack thought about leaving, he didn't even say it out loud. He just sat in his truck after work, watching the sun dip behind the trees, and wondered what it would feel like to drive somewhere else. Somewhere she wasn't waiting with a look of disappointment already on her face. He never drove off. Instead, he went inside, reheated leftovers, and told himself that maybe tomorrow would be better. It wasn't. The resentment started showing up in new ways. Elena stayed out later, stopped pretending her excuses made sense. When Jack asked where she'd been, she'd shrug and say, "Out," like that should be enough. He began to dread coming home, but he still came back, because that's what you do when you've built a life and don't know how to unbuild it without destroying yourself too. Then came the night she told him, "You know what your problem is? You think paying the bills and fixing the sink makes you a man, but all it makes you is predictable, boring." He didn't answer. He just stood there, hands still dirty from work, and felt something in his chest shift. Not break, not yet, but lean toward breaking. Jack didn't tell anyone what was happening at home. Not at first. He wasn't the kind to complain, but people noticed. His brother called late one night. "You all right?" Jack said he was. He wasn't. His coworker Mick asked, "You sleeping at all? You look wrecked." Jack laughed it off, but the concern stuck with him longer than Elena's criticism ever did. The silence at home became heavier. Sometimes Jack would wake up on the couch and realize she hadn't even come home. Other times she'd pass him in the hallway like he was a stranger. He started getting up earlier, leaving for work before she stirred. He'd sit in his truck with the engine off, listening to the silence, trying to remember what it felt like to be wanted, Then one night, her friend Lena called. She said she couldn't keep watching it happen. Said Elena talked about Jack like he was some burden she regretted ever taking on. That she laughed about him behind his back. That she told people he was too simple to ever leave. Jack didn't get angry. He just felt cold. Like someone had turned off the last light in a house already full of shadows. He sat there a long time after that call, phone in his lap, thinking about the man he used to be. The one who helped a stranger at the hardware store and thought maybe, just maybe, she was someone who could fit beside him. Not change him, not fix him, just be with him. By the time Jack stood up, something in him had changed. Not broken, solidified. He wasn't going to beg anymore. After the call from Lena, Jack started seeing things for what they really were. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was contempt. Elena didn't care enough to hide it. She stopped making excuses for coming home late. Sometimes she'd walk in, laugh into her phone, and head straight to the bedroom without even acknowledging him. Other nights, she'd look Jack in the eye and say things that cut deeper than yelling ever could. You still sitting here eating reheated stew like it's 1985? Or, it's actually depressing how low your standards are. Jack never responded with anger. He didn't shout or slam doors. He just absorbed it. Not because he was weak, but because he was trying to understand how the woman he once believed in could turn so cold. He used to think she was sharp, full of life. Now he saw her edge had turned mean. He didn't tell her he knew she was seeing someone. Didn't need to. It was obvious in the way she smiled at her phone, the way she wore perfume to go out for drinks, the way she came home smelling like a stranger's car. She was already gone. She just hadn't packed a bag. Jack kept going to work. He poured concrete, hauled lumber, kept the job site running. His co-workers noticed the shift. Mick stopped joking around and started handing Jack his lunch without a word. No one asked anymore. They just made space for him to breathe. At home, Jack started sleeping on the couch full-time. There was no fight, no decision made. He just stopped going to the bed they once shared. Sometimes he'd hear her walk past him in the morning, sometimes not. They became ghosts in the same space, one resenting the silence, the other finally growing used to it. Then one night, everything shifted. Jack came home late after a long day, his clothes still carrying the smell of cement and sweat. Elena was already there, sitting at the table, scrolling her phone. He stepped inside, set down his keys, and said nothing. "You look pathetic," she said without even looking up. Jack paused. "Then don't look at me." It wasn't loud, but it landed hard. She blinked, just once, surprised. Then she laughed. "Finally growing a spine? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just done pretending you're better than me." She didn't have a response, just walked away, the hallway swallowing her steps. Jack didn't follow, didn't apologize. He sat back down and finished his meal. That night, he didn't feel small. He felt steady. Lena called again a few days later. She didn't say much, just that Elena had been telling people Jack was too dull to notice anything, that she was bragging about how easy it was to get away with it. Lena sounded tired, guilty even, for being the one to break it to him. Jack just listened. "You deserve better," she said quietly. "I know," he answered, and for the first time he meant it. The next few days, Jack didn't speak to Elena at all. They passed each other like co-workers on different shifts. But the tension was gone, for him anyway. She noticed. One evening, she came home and paused in the doorway, surprised to see him already eating dinner at the table, calm as ever. "You waiting up for me?" she asked. "No, just eating." She stared at him like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Jack had changed. He wasn't chasing her anymore, wasn't hoping for anything. He was just done. The next morning, Jack's brother showed up. No warning, no small talk. He looked around the house, eyes scanning the walls like they held the answers. "You ready?" he asked. "Almost. You built this place. You don't owe her another inch." Jack nodded. It was simple, but it was everything he needed to hear. That night, he packed a small suitcase. Not for himself, but for her. He didn't throw anything, didn't make a scene, just zipped it up and left it by the door. When Elena came home, she saw it and raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Options, Jack said. For you. She scoffed. You think you're kicking me out? I don't think. I know. You won't. You don't have the guts. Jack stood up. Watch me. There was no shouting, no pleading. She just stared at him, calculating, trying to find the version of him she used to control. He was gone. Still, he didn't ask her to leave that night, didn't hand her the hotel key. He waited one last time to see if she'd say something that might change his mind. But she didn't. She moved through the house like he didn't exist, like her presence was a favor. The next morning, Jack sat in the kitchen, coffee in hand, waiting. When she walked in with her purse and keys, he didn't give her the chance to run. We need to talk. I don't have time. Make time. She sat, arms crossed, eyes already tired of him. You're not happy, he said. And neither am I. I'm not blind, and I'm not pretending anymore. She rolled her eyes. So what? You finally grew a pair? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of living with someone who resents me for being myself. You're proud of being ordinary, she said, spitting the word like a curse. I'm proud of what I built, of working hard, of keeping this roof over our heads while you chased anything that looked like escape. She laughed bitterly. I didn't choose you. I settled for you. Jack didn't flinch. Then you're free to unsettle. He placed a hotel key on the table. It was paid up for a month. Enough time for her to figure it out. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel abandoned. He felt free. After Elena left, Jack didn't move. He sat at the kitchen table, the hotel key still resting in the middle, untouched. Her footsteps had faded, but the silence remained. Not the kind he used to dread. This one felt earned. That evening, Jack boxed up her things. Not out of anger. He folded her sweaters, packed her books, and wrapped up the photos she insisted on hanging. Every item had once meant something. Now they were just reminders of how far things had fallen. He stacked the boxes by the front door. No note, no dramatics, just quiet closure. 2 days later, her sister showed up to collect them. She didn't say much, just looked at Jack with a kind of soft regret. You didn't deserve this, she said. Jack didn't argue. He didn't need to. The evidence was everywhere. After she left, he walked through the house, not to chase memories, but to reclaim space. The bed no longer felt like a battlefield. The couch was just a place to sit, not a substitute for peace. For the first time in years, his house belonged to him again. Lena called that evening. She didn't ask if Elena had moved out. She already knew. You okay? She asked. I'm getting there, Jack said. There was a pause. If you ever want to talk, or just not sit in that house alone, I might take you up on that. They didn't make plans, but the conversation lingered. The kindness in her voice felt different, clean, without agenda. The next few days were filled with simple things. Jack cleaned out the garage, fixed the cabinet hinges she'd complained about but never touched, and regrouted the bathroom tiles. Every task gave him back a little more of himself. Every repair was a reminder. This house was his, and he'd kept it standing through years of emotional rot. His brother dropped by on a Saturday. He looked around the newly cleared living room, then back at Jack. Looks better. Feels better, Jack said. You talked to her? No. You want to? Jack thought for a moment. Not really. What's left to say? His brother nodded. Then that's how you know it's over. 1 week later, Lena invited him over. It wasn't a date, just coffee and company. Her home was different. Small, warm, filled with little signs of life. Jack sat on her couch, drinking beer while she talked about her work, her dog, the cold snap coming in. She didn't press him to explain anything. She just let him be there. You look lighter, she said eventually. I feel lighter. They didn't touch, didn't talk about what came next. But when Jack left that night, the weight in his chest was smaller. A few days later, Elena started telling people her version of the story, that Jack had been impossible to live with, that he was emotionally cold, that she was the one who had to walk away. Jack heard it through the grapevine. Someone even showed him a text message she'd sent, saying he lacked ambition and wasn't a real man. Jack didn't get angry. He didn't defend himself. He just shrugged. Let her say what she wants. I'm done playing along. What surprised him most was how little it hurt. For so long, he'd braced for pain, thought the end of their story would leave a crater. But the truth was, the end didn't explode. It dissolved. Elena had already left the relationship long before she walked out the door. Jack was just the last one to admit it. He started seeing Lena more often. Coffee turned into dinner. Conversation into silence that wasn't tense. They didn't make promises. But Jack found himself looking forward to her voice, the way she asked how his day went and actually waited for an answer. One night, sitting at her table, she reached across and took his hand. She was never going to see you for who you are, she said. Jack looked at her. But you did, she nodded. For what it's worth. It was worth more than she knew. Later that week, Jack drove past the hardware store where he first met Elena. He slowed down, glanced at the parking lot, remembered the moment. Her voice, her irritation, the way she challenged him even then. For a second, he let himself feel it, then drove on. He didn't need to rewrite the past. He just didn't want to live in it anymore. Back at home, the quiet wasn't empty. It was calm. He no longer waited for the sound of the door slamming or the sting of another insult. The tension that used to hum through the walls had gone silent. In its place was a kind of stillness Jack hadn't known he missed. He poured a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the scratched wood beneath his hands. For years, he thought those scars were signs of wear, proof that he was stuck. Now they looked like history, proof he'd endured. And maybe, just maybe, they were the beginning of something better. In the weeks after Elena left, Jack didn't rush into anything. No big declarations, no sudden changes. He didn't shave his head, buy a motorcycle, or post long speeches online. What he did was simple. He lived. He started each day with coffee and silence, not because he had to brace for a fight, but because he could finally enjoy the stillness. The air in the house was different now, lighter. The rooms didn't echo with tension anymore. They just existed. And so did he. Jack went back to work with more clarity. He wasn't distracted, wasn't constantly checking his phone, hoping or dreading a message. He showed up on time, handled his crew, and went home to a house that no longer felt like a cage. Lena texted now and then. Short messages. How's the house? Get through the weekend, okay? Need a beer and a break from drywall dust? Jack always replied. Not with much, but enough to keep the thread between them alive. One weekend, he took her up on it. They met at the same little diner they'd both known for years. Nothing fancy, just a booth, 2 mugs of coffee, and a shared understanding that neither of them was trying to prove anything. They talked, not about Elena, at least not much, mostly about work, small-town drama, weather, memories. Jack realized how rare it was to speak without defending yourself, without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Lena didn't press. She just listened. That alone meant more than she probably realized. Back home, Jack kept cleaning out the life he'd built with Elena. Not out of spite, just necessity. He threw out the chipped mugs she insisted on keeping, donated the throw pillows he never liked, got rid of the candles that always made him sneeze. Every item that left the house made room for something he actually wanted to keep. One evening, he found a shoebox of old notes and cards from Elena. Some were sweet from the early days, handwritten apologies after fights, small thank yous for fixing the sink or bringing her coffee in bed. Jack read a few. They didn't sting. They felt like a version of her that no longer existed, a version he'd once loved. He put the box in the trash. His brother stopped by again a few days later, walked through the house, nodded approvingly. She call you? He asked. No. Think she will? Doesn't matter. His brother smiled. That's how I know you're finally done. Lena came over for coffee the next week. She stepped into the garage and looked around at the labeled bins, the neat rows of tools, the reclaimed order. This place looks like your brain, she said with a soft laugh. Jack took it as a compliment. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table Elena once called pathetic. But now, with 2 mugs and soft conversation, it felt like Jack had finally taken it back. They talked about nothing in particular. Lena's job, a funny moment at work, a neighbor who'd put Christmas lights up in October. At one point, she placed her hand over his. Just a gesture. but it anchored him. "You look better," she said. "I feel better." They didn't talk about what came next. No plans, no expectations. But when she left that night, Jack noticed something different. The house didn't feel empty. It felt open. About a month after Elena moved out, her sister texted, "Just so you know, she moved in with a friend. She's telling people you were impossible to live with." Jack read the message twice. Then, without hesitation, replied, "She can say what she wants. I'm done." That was the truth. He wasn't interested in correcting the record. People could believe what they wanted. Jack had lived the truth. That was enough. Most nights he came home, turned on the porch light, and stood for a moment looking at the quiet around him, not dreading the silence, just letting it settle. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the stairs, the soft tick of the clock on the wall. No shouting, no accusations, just life. He started fixing things that had been ignored for too long. Patched a crack in the drywall, replaced the screen door, realigned the gutters. Each task was small, but each one gave him back a little more of what had been taken. Control, peace, pride. One Saturday, Lena stopped by unannounced. "You want help organizing the basement?" she asked. Jack almost said no out of habit, but then he looked at her, steady, no judgment, no pressure, and said, "Yeah, sure." They spent the afternoon sorting boxes, tossing junk, laughing over an old board game that was missing half the pieces. At one point, they found a box of Elena's old magazines. Jack picked it up, paused, then handed it to Lena. "Garage donation pile?" She nodded. "Garage donation pile." When the day was done, Lena lingered in the doorway. "You ever think about how long you stayed where you didn't belong?" she asked. "Every day," Jack said. "But you're not there anymore." "No," he said. "I'm not." She reached for his hand again. This time he didn't flinch. He just held on. That night, as he sat alone with a cold beer, Jack didn't feel haunted. He didn't feel angry. He felt still. There was no need to rehash what happened, no temptation to run from it either. He had survived it, and now he was building something better. Not louder, not faster, just stronger. Something that lasted. By the time autumn rolled in, Jack had stopped counting the weeks since Elena left. The house had fully changed, quiet but not empty. The difference wasn't just in the things that were gone. It was in the air, in the way he walked from room to room without bracing for conflict. He had cleared out every drawer, every shelf, every trace of her, not to erase the past, but to give himself space for the future. And in doing so, he realized something simple but powerful. You don't need someone to move on. You just need to stop dragging their weight behind you. Jack didn't try to replace what he'd lost. He didn't dive into a new relationship. He didn't pretend to be fine before he was. Instead, he gave himself time. Time to rebuild not just the house, but the parts of himself that had been slowly worn down over the years. Confidence, patience, hope. He and Lena saw each other regularly, but it wasn't rushed. It started with small things, a cup of coffee, a walk around town, conversations that felt safe. They didn't label it. There were no speeches, no promises. But it was real. One evening at the diner, Jack mentioned that he'd driven past the hardware store where he first met Elena. "Did it hit you hard?" Lena asked. "Not really," he said. "Just made me think about how much I didn't know back then." She gave a quiet nod, then said, "And how much you've learned now." That struck Jack. He had learned, not just about Elena, but about himself, about what it meant to stay when you should leave, and what it means to walk away with dignity instead of rage. One night, while reorganizing the garage, he came across a forgotten photo of him and Elena. It was from their early days, both smiling, arms around each other at some town event. Jack stared at it for a moment, then set it aside without emotion. Not because he felt nothing, but because the man in that photo wasn't the same man standing here now. And that was okay. He was no longer mourning what he thought he'd built. He was proud of surviving it. Lena came over later that week. They made dinner together. Nothing elaborate, just something warm. After eating, they sat on the porch and listened to the breeze rustling the trees. Lena sipped her wine and looked over at him. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't met her?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "No, I needed to go through it." Otherwise, I wouldn't be here now. You don't regret it? I regret how long I stayed, he said. But not that I stayed. It taught me what I won't accept again. Lena smiled. That's the part most people skip. Later that night, she kissed him for the first time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was simple, honest, like everything Jack had come to value. A few weeks passed. The holidays crept in. Jack didn't feel the usual dread this time. He decorated the house a little, not because anyone expected it, but because he wanted to. He got a message from Elena's sister around then. Just a short note. She's moving out of state. Said she's starting fresh. Jack read it, then deleted it. He didn't need to know where she was going. That chapter was over. Not bitter, just closed. One snowy Saturday, Lena and Jack walked through a local market, buying vegetables and sharing a bag of roasted peanuts. They stopped at a bench and sat quietly, people watching. Jack turned to her. Did you know back then, he asked, that things were that bad between us? Lena nodded. Most people did. You just didn't want to see it. Why didn't anyone say anything? You're a grown man, Jack. People figured you'd leave when you were ready. He looked down, nodded slowly. I was scared to be alone. You were already alone, she said. You just didn't know it yet. That hit hard, but it didn't hurt. It was just true. That night, back at home, Jack looked around the house one more time. The same floors, same walls, same table. But everything was different. It belonged to him now. Not the man who tolerated insults and begged for crumbs, but the man who had stood up, spoken clearly, and said, enough. He thought about all the times he'd stayed silent to keep the peace. About the moments he convinced himself it was just a phase, just stress, just temporary. And how those lies almost made him forget his own worth. He'd spent years being told he wasn't enough. Now he knew the truth. He had always been more than enough. He just gave that truth to someone who couldn't see it. As he lay in bed that night, his bed, in his house, in the life he'd rebuilt, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from pretending everything's fine, the kind that grows slowly after a long storm, quiet, earned, honest. He wasn't looking for a fairy tale. He wasn't looking for a grand ending. He was just living, and that finally was enough.